Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Megan Murphy, of course, and I'm here with Mary Lou Singleton. And we normally have Isabella Malbin with us, but we don't have her with us today. And so we were thrilled to have Heather Hying. How can I not know this by now? It's because I write too much and don't talk enough.
That also contributes.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Like a few housekeeping things before we get into things. If you're watching on YouTube, I will try my very best to keep an eye on the live chat. But if you have a question that you actually want me to see, please use the super chat because I really can't follow along that closely. Otherwise, I won't hear anything that Mary Lou and Heather say. If you're watching on Twitter, I'm not paying any attention to you at all, but I hope you enjoy the stream. And be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss future streams. I think that's it. Clearly, I'm very organized. Heather is an evolutionary biologist and, of course, co-host of the Dark Horse podcast. And she recently wrote a very good post about the issues that we're going to be discussing today over on her Substack, which is at naturalselections.bio. I've linked to it below in the show notes on YouTube. And of course, Mary Lou Singleton is a midwife, a nurse practitioner, and a legendary defender of reality. Her newly launched podcast, co-hosted with Jocelyn McDonald, is How I Healed. And you should find that for sure on your favorite podcast apps, but also on Substack at howihealed.substack.com. The thing, I was trying to think about even how to describe what we're talking about today, because like in some ways it's like a niche controversy and niche discussion. People who are either involved in the radical feminist community or the sort of gender critical community, as it's often called, refer to this as AGP. What we're talking about is autogynephiles and what the broader public might understand to be transsexualism in the 80s or transgenderism in the nows. I think that first, the reason why we're talking about this today and the reason why there's a particular controversy about this week is connected to a conference that happened earlier this month, put on by Genspect. I think it's called The Bigger Picture. And Heather was there in attendance. So I don't know that much about Genspect, and I'm curious to know, before we get into the weeds of things, if Heather, you can sort of talk about your experiences there and what the conference was like for you.
Sure. Entirely aside from the controversy that we are here to talk about, I will say that I didn't know all that much about the organization when they invited me to talk, except that I understood it to be one of an ever-growing number of organizations now that are cropping up to fight, gender madness, to basically argue for reality-based understanding of sex and gender, and specifically, I believe I'm pulling this from their website, to resist medicalization of children's feelings at the very least until they reach an age of majority. It's not as fully. I don't think that Genspect understands itself to be completely opposed to a number of things that many of us are actually opposed to in this space. They try to be a kind of a big tent, which is tough, right? So at this conference, there were, I don't know how many people. I would, something on the order of hundreds. 3. I don't know if it was closer to 200 or 400, but something in that realm, more than 2 for sure. A lot of parents of kids who are currently confused and sucked in to the gender ideology. I spoke to many of them. Their stories are heartbreaking, and these parents are amazing, and their kids are amazing, but struggling. A lot of therapists, a lot of health professionals, a few scientists. So, I gave a talk, and Colin Wright gave a talk, and there were some policy people, some lawyers. There were, just what other activists of various sort, detransitioners, and then a few people who are transitioned or understand themselves to be living as the gender that they are not, whether or not they see themselves as transitioning. Put that very small, in terms of the representation of the conference, aside for the moment. The conference itself was welcoming and amazing, and I got to meet a number of people who I've been wanting to meet for a long time, and in some ways, I think the most gratifying thing was talking with both therapists and parents who are just on the ground with what is happening and experiencing it, seeing it in either their personal lives, their professional lives, depending, and getting to hear stories. And so it was a very compact conference, 2 full days with an evening beforehand where a lot of people hung out, and it was just packed with talks from a lot of people, and it was a terrific experience.
Awesome. I mean, I sort of have my own, I guess, criticisms of the big tent approach and some of what I've heard and seen from Genspect, and I should say that I'm not, again, super familiar with the organization, so I'm not going to come down on them with some big critique. And it sounds like this conference was pretty impressive. I don't personally or politically buy into this concept of transgenderism in and of itself. I don't buy into the concept of transphobia. I don't believe there's such a thing as a trans person or a trans child. And I suppose I think that that's part of the problem, that a lot of the women who were angered by what happened at the conference maybe have with Genspect and the conference in general. But I mean, what specifically triggered everyone, of course, was the presence of this man whose name is Phil Illy. And he's the author of a book about autogynephile, and he identifies himself as a man who has autogynephile. So at some point, the Genspect Twitter account posted a photo of this man, and he was wearing a blue velvet dress, sort of dressed up as a woman, though I've never seen a woman dressed like that before.
And that's before the entire conference.
The same outfit?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
That's odd. I mean, I can't imagine like that any of the other women attending the conference put on an outfit like that.
No, I mean, and I think there are so many, this is the actual points here, I think, but one of them is, if he had been dressed like any of the women had been dressed, we were at a professional conference, and there was variation in how we were dressed for sure. But this would have felt very different. Instead, it was this performative, I need to draw all eyes to me, so that you can be brought into my kink, honestly.
Mhm.
And I've been told, it's not a kink, it's not a fetish, it's a paraphilia. Like, I don't care what you call it anymore. Like, I'm done caring about those distinctions between the words, because if you're like, this book is, the piece that I wrote, I think I was way too soft. I was way too kind. The book, I mean, I have it here, and here's a chapter on trans age. There's a chapter on transracialism. There's chapters on what if you think you're a furry? What if you think you're an animal? And it's a mental illness, and why are we celebrating it? Why are we letting it go public? I don't get it.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. And I just want to mention the book is called Auto-Heterosexual, Being Attracted to Being the Other Sex. Sorry to
Attracted to
interrupt.
being the other sex, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Mary Lou, go ahead.
That's a big book, I'm gonna say, and I hope you didn't pay money for that book, Heather.
No, he handed it.
Okay.
He approached me and asked me if I would take it,
Okay.
and we talked a little bit, and we disagreed, but we disagreed about what I think is like just the shallow end of the pool with regard to what there is to disagree about in this book, and I don't know why we are letting people bring everyone else into their own niche fantasies. This is not something we used to do.
Right. And I think that like when the controversy kind of first blew up, the argument was between, I'm oversimplifying, but I saw this a lot. The argument was between those who were saying, I thought we were saying, let people wear what they want to wear. If a man wants to wear a dress, he can wear a dress. We're not against gender nonconformity. We are against transgenderism. We're against transing kids. We're against saying that literally men can become women, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I was seeing this first go down, I was sort of unsure what to think about it all, because I do believe that. I mean, I'm like, if you want to wear a dress, if you want to wear makeup, if you want to wear a wig or grow your hair long as a man, of course you can do this. But I think you're totally right that it's like you're doing this on purpose, probably in part to be provocative, and because this isn't just about, oh, I just want to wear what I feel comfortable in, like I want to wear, if you were really just interested in wearing women's clothes, you might show up in like pants and a blazer and a button up top. Like that's what I might wear to a conference.
Well, this is a man with two visible paraphilias, right? He is an exhibitionist and he's an autogynephile. And exhibitionism is, in my opinion, a form of, minor form of sexual assault. Like it is forcing me to participate in your kink. This is forcing me to participate in your sex life. And that's not to be tolerated, in my opinion. I don't know where the line is at a conference like this, like, of whether or not Phil's presence should have been tolerated. But my issue with Genspect literally promoted his book, that they posted a picture of this man posing with Laura Becker, a detransitioner, and they gave both their Twitter handles, and they said, check out Phil's book, which to me looks like an endorsement. And they've since backtracked, but I don't think that's just oversight. That is an endorsement of this man's philosophy, which is trying to get us all to be more accommodating of his kink, right?
Well, I think I don't know what went on in anyone else's head, of course, but I think it was an error, and I think that they understand that was an error. But I also think if I track like my own thinking on this, and Megan, you also sort of describe, not having been there, but having seen the thing evolve. At first, I thought, well, okay. When I first saw him, 24 hours before he approached me, and I was like, wait, is that a dude in a dress here? Like, but in a blue velvet dress, no less, like with like gloves and everything. Like, what? That's strange, right? Am I seeing that? I asked the woman I was sitting next to. She's like, yeah, you're seeing that. And I had this like, okay, why am I having this reaction? I wonder if he thinks he's a woman. That matters to me if he's confused about that. But also if it had just been like Corinna Cohn was there, and Corinna Cohn doesn't mind if you call her him or him her, depending, whatever it is that you want to call this person. And Corinna Cohn was dressed appropriately. Given that Corinna understands herself to be a woman, or to be living as a woman at this point. And I don't even like, given that she, and you can see me like struggling with the pronouns here because I won't do it in most cases, but precisely because Corinna is actually so open about, you know what, I know I'm a man, and I know I had these surgeries, and I know I've been living as a woman for a while, and maybe that was a mistake, and here we go. Like, when someone does that, I want to be actually generous and gracious, right? As opposed to exactly as you say, Mary Lou, like, this is exhibitionism. Like, you want to be an autogynephile, which, at least as Phil describes it in the book, is being attracted to the idea of yourself as the other sex. Like, okay, do that in the privacy of your own home, like the rest of us do our sexual stuff in the privacy of our own homes. Why do you get to drag all the rest of us into it? And I don't think that Genspect was endorsing everything in this book, right? Just like when I first went looking into it, I didn't see all of the things that were in it that make me now think, oh, this is actually not even that subtle. Like, we are supposed to simply believe people's delusions when they say them and go along with them, even when they clearly are going down a road to cause damage to other people. And no, we shouldn't be agreeing to that at all. But I think it's easy to fall prey, even for those of us who are like actively thinking about this.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues that, because I've seen these kind of controversies erupt before online, when there's, for example, a panel or a conference event that's critical of gender identity ideology, critical of transgenderism, and there is the inclusion of a man who identifies as maybe a transsexual or trans woman, but that's also critical of gender identity ideology. And I think that some people come at that with a kind of fascination. Like, how can you be a so-called trans woman, but then also not believe in transgender ideology? And I think that draws some people in, or you know, they think that this person might have something particularly insightful to say about the ideology or phenomenon. But I just don't think that's true. You know, like, I've seen a lot of insightful analysis and critique and commentary and whistleblowing over the years from women and from some men too, of course. But just the fact that you're a man in a dress, or maybe even that you've gone through with all these surgeries, it doesn't make me particularly fascinated with your view. And it also actually, in a lot of ways, makes me sort of trust your view less, because I feel like you're living sort of a contradiction. And you, like, how can you have done all this and gone through all this and still be sort of living as a woman, but then also critical of that concept? I don't know if I believe it or buy it totally.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance is interesting to look at, but it doesn't mean that the person inherently has something interesting to say.
Exactly. And maybe I'm just, a woman who's had enough experience with men to be deeply suspicious of many of their motivations. But I think many of these men, this is how they've figured out how to practice their kink, and that they are getting sexually aroused by the attention the gender critical women are giving them as they perform their autogynephilia in this particular way of critiquing, mainstream transgenderism while they're wearing their fetish wear. And again, I don't know, like, I certainly don't want to see, draconian laws about dress codes come back, but I would like to talk to you, Heather, about where those things seem to arise again and again in cultures, and maybe we're witnessing how these taboos and liety arise whenever anything goes is tried out and it doesn't work well. Maybe that's how we end up saying, all right, no more men in dresses anywhere, because it's going wrong all over the place.
Yeah, I wouldn't advocate for laws, but we, as I write about, right, the social contract used to be a thing, and we weren't afraid to invoke it. We weren't afraid to say, actually, there's a bunch of us who don't think that that's the right thing for you to be doing, and we don't think you should go to jail for it. We just think that, like, how about this? Like, shame is useful, right? Like, these emotions, these negative emotions that we experience, that we try to avoid them for a reason, not because, oh, they make us feel bad, therefore let's deal with the symptom and keep on getting to do the thing that made us feel bad. Like, no, like, shame is actually useful. And do people get shamed for the wrong things? Yes. Do we make errors? Yes, of course. But we were moving towards a world where there were actual safe spaces, as you know, as broken as that term is now, but like actual safe spaces for women. And breaking this part of the social contract means that all of us, 50% of the population, now has to be on alert at all times in ways that we didn't have to be.
Right.
And that's not okay. That's not, I don't, you know, your niche paraphilia, you know, to be as nice as we can about it, your niche paraphilia that applies to some tiny, tiny, tiny portion of the population doesn't get to trump the hard-won rights of 50% of the population. I can't even believe that we're having this conversation. Like, how do we reverse course so remarkably
and quickly? Well, and this comes up in the debate around the bathroom thing, where you know, people, so trans activists or men identifying as trans women will say, like, first of all, they'll say, oh, I just want to pee. Why can't I pee? Obviously, I can't go into the men's washroom. It's too dangerous for me there because I'm dressed up as a woman, which is kind of, you know, to me, it's like, well, that's not my problem. And you don't have to dress like that. So you made that choice. Some people might look at you funny. This is life. It doesn't mean that I think it's okay for somebody to beat you up. But, you know, there used to be, and then they're saying, well, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to police everyone's genitals who's coming into the bathroom? So are you going to screen for, you know, who has a penis, for example, coming into the bathroom? How are you going to stop me? Are you going to check IDs? And it's like, no, it's what you were talking about here. There was, for a very, very long time, a social contract. It just was unacceptable. And that made a difference.
Yeah. And it also, you know, men and women both would police this. And I'm using police in the, you know, not at the level of the law, at the level of the social contract, meaning, like, you know, guys, if you're in a bar and a guy sees another guy going into the women's bathroom, the dude who's not going to the bathroom be like, dude, you don't belong in there. Like, that's something that men did. And everyone but some of us are being cowed into this, like, oh, but that would be disrespectful. That would be bigoted. That's, you know, that's their identity. It's like, no, actually, dude, you don't belong in there. Like, we all need to feel the courage and remind ourselves that we have the freedom to say, yeah, not your place. Actually, that's not your place. There are some places that aren't for you, and that's one of them.
There's a comment in the chat that I just wanted to read because I thought maybe it's a bit interesting. Fashion is often exhibitionist, and sometimes people make funky choices. I don't think we can fault Phil for not wearing a business-like outfit. Men should be able to wear a dress and nail polish, which I think encapsulates much of this conflict. I mean, do you think that it's that most people aren't seeing this as a fetish and people are just saying, you know, he just likes wearing these clothes, so live and let live?
Yeah, I think that is part of it. And I think there's also, you know, the thing that he and I actually disagreed about in person when we disagreed was his attempt to make symmetrical, you know, he says, okay, autogynephilia is a straight man turning his attraction inward to seeing himself as a woman, which, like, that takes a whole lot of psychological mental gymnastics to get there, but okay, take that at face value for the moment. But then he goes, well, autoandrophilia is, you know, a straight woman who is turned the object of her attraction inwards and, you know, sees herself as a man. And I'm like, okay, but, you know, men and women aren't the same. Like, you know, male homosexuality and female homosexuality isn't the same. And so too, should you not expect that this to be the same thing? Like, to the degree that girls and young women are confused about what sex they are, it's not mostly that. Like, it's going to be some other things that are driving that. And maybe he's right that to the degree that men are confused about what sex they are, it is this strange thing that I honestly cannot understand. Like, I can say the words, but I don't know really what it means, to, like, turn the object of your attraction inward. It feels very mentally compromised, honestly.
And narcissistic.
And narcissistic. Yes, yeah, exactly. But, well, it's a professional conference, right? And yes, there were people who weren't dressed professionally, but I remember one of my very first jobs. I worked in an office in summer in college, and I hated it. And I was the men were the professionals and the women were the secretaries. It was that archaic and stupid. And I was the only woman there who refused to wear heels and hose and skirts, but I dressed professionally. And the men thought that was fine. And the women were the ones who tried to police me into wearing heels. It's like, I don't wear heels. I'm not doing it. Like, it doesn't impact my ability to do the work. And I'm not here as a display object, so I'm not doing it.
And I don't want to be uncomfortable.
And I'm not like, it compromises me in every regard. And I'm not doing it. And it was fine, in part because just like everything else, this isn't symmetrical. Like men's, why are, I don't know what you guys are wearing, but like, why are we all likely to be dressed more like men from 100 years ago than women from 100 years ago? Because women's fashion historically was frivolous and compromised and silly. And it furthered this idea of like women as decorative object. And so at the point that it becomes clear that like actually women should be able to not be in the world being frivolous and decorative and silly, then we can dress in ways that actually allow us to walk fast and not put ourselves at risk by doing so, right? So the move to go into traditionally male clothing is certainly not inherently sexual. Like almost the opposite, right?
Exactly.
Whereas the move for men to go into women's clothing, aside from, if it's really hot, like there are, kilts exist, right? Like there are reasons to wear skirts and such, but this is explicitly stated as a paraphilia, as a sexual thing, as I am attracted to the idea of seeing myself in this way. And I don't know, I don't know women who walk around going like, I'm attracted to seeing myself this way. It's like, no, you're just like, you're out in the world being who you are, not constantly turning it back on yourself going like, am I presenting the right way? Are people engaging with me the way that I want them to be engaging with me as, even though I'm pretending I am something I'm not? Like, I suppose some people do that sometimes, but it's not the everything. It's not everything that we do.
Women certainly have been known to dress in very like sexed up ways to attract sexual attention, but they don't go to conferences like that. At least not professional conferences. And if a woman had shown up in a leather bra and a G-string, people would have had an issue with it, right? It wouldn't. They probably. There's also the issue that women are much less likely to be exhibitionists because women are much less likely to be sexually violent. And women do not force their kinks on other humans. And this is a huge area of this conversation that is not happening nearly to the extent that I would like to see it happen, where can we talk about male sexual paraphilias, the connection to male violence, that men with paraphilias are more likely to be violent than men without paraphilias. Nicola Williams did that study in England on incarcerated men, and the men who were transvestites and identified as transgender, over 50% of them were in jail for sexual offenses, as compared to 11% of the overall male incarcerated population. And we're told that we can't have this conversation. It's not polite, it's unkind, but this is real. And women, we know this in our core. We are creeped out by autogynephiles. To a large degree, women are, and that's a survival mechanism. And how do we make space to be allowed to have this piece of the conversation and start reopening psychological study, like the work that Ray Blanchard was doing on what's up with these men psychologically, what's going on with them?
Right. No, I feel like Blanchard's work, for most of the people who are advocating for it, stopped for them at like, he named a thing. It's a real thing. Like, now we get to talk about being the thing, as opposed to, yes, but that's actually a problem. And you should try to work on that, as opposed to flaunt it for everyone.
Right. Because what has happened is that it's become about normalizing instead of being like, okay, if you have a porn addiction and you have a fetish that is taking over your life to such an extent that it's taking over your whole life. So it's not just something that you're doing in the privacy of your own home in a sexual context, but you're taking out of the world. And as you said, Mary Lou, imposing on other people, then that is a problem. And you need to work on that. And you should try to stop doing it. And I think that in general in this conversation, there's a lot of things that we all know but we've been trained out of seeing or inherently understanding, some of which, basically, like, why would you choose to wear women's clothing instead of men's clothing if you have the option? I mean, if I'm in my home or I'm walking around the world, if I'm not at like some event, then I'm going to be wearing basically the same clothes that a man would wear, and very often actual men's clothes. I find men's shoes more comfortable than women's shoes. I like wearing like big t-shirts. I think that shorts are fairly universal.
You probably like pockets.
I literally to the gym, I wear like big, and I buy men's muscle shirts because I don't want them to be like small and touching my body. I have never gotten to understand the idea of like wanting sexual attention at the gym, because you're gross and sweaty. But like, I think obviously, I mean, I think the vast majority of women wouldn't feel more comfortable in an outfit like that. You're not gonna feel more comfortable in a tight dress and heels than you are in men's clothes or just, kind of more basic women's clothes. Again, pants, shoes, a jacket, a regular shirt. And so you're not doing it for your comfort. You can't really honestly just say, this is just what I feel more comfortable in, because that's bullshit. It is bullshit.
Yeah. It's something occurred to me while you were talking, though, Megan. If I did not expect to think that I might end up steel manning the other position here, but
do it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, and this is how I felt since I started going through puberty. It's like, why would I draw attention? Like, I'm already getting too much attention. Suddenly, I'm getting way too much attention. I can choose which attention to go to, and it's a question of picking and choosing as opposed to trying to solicit attention ever. And this has always been the case for young women who at all match the beauty standards for their culture, right? So this has always been the case. It's not the case for men, and this has deep evolutionary roots. And yes, we're not bowerbirds. It's not sexual reverse bowerbirds where it's only the women showing off and being beautiful and being sexually attractive, and the males coming to them. Like, males also, like, we're also choosing men, but the fact is that young women in particular get no end of attention, no end of sexual attention. And so for us, even, I'm not a young woman anymore, but like, I know that throughout my youth, I felt like, why would I ever do anything to try to get more of that? And it's not that I didn't want any of it ever, but I did not need any more than I was getting. Whereas men don't get that kind of attention by and large. So if men are looking at the landscape that women experience, and this is all different now. So I don't know, for the last 10 years, all of this has been muddled and weird due to how many poisons we're putting into people and screens and everything. So like, people just aren't as universally beautiful as they were before when they're young, right? So it's a different landscape. But what if as women, universal experience of having gone through youth and having gotten sexual attention almost every time we went outside that we didn't solicit and didn't necessarily want, is looked at by men and some men, tiny minority of men, and they say, actually, I want that. I want that attention. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And I assume, like, I can't, and I assume that you guys can't really get into that mindset because we lived through, like, could it please stop already?
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'll never get that. How can I get that?
I mean, for sure that makes sense. And I think especially for a man who was sort of, like a loser and not conventionally attractive and didn't look like the alpha male. So he's getting even less attention. There are some men who go out in the world and get attention. It's not the same kind of attention that a woman might get out in the world, but it does make sense. And I also want to say, just, for the purposes of being honest, I guess, when I was younger, I did like to go out in next to nothing, and I did want that attention because I was seeking I think I was seeking power and empowerment and confidence, and that's the only way I knew how to do that at that age, because those are the messages, of course, that you get. And as you get older, you start to realize more what actual real confidence feels like. And honestly, that if you're a woman, you really don't need to do any of that stuff to get male attention. Like, it really doesn't take any effort on our part for the most part. And you just you care more about your comfort and your health than you do probably when you're 19 years old and you're out in the winter in like a mesh tank top and heels.
Did you really?
Oh Lord, there was like an entire winter where I don't think I wore pants for the whole winter. I'm exaggerating. But yeah, I think I was cold for at least a winter, very cold.
And then you learned your lesson.
And then I was like, I don't think I need to do this, and I would rather be warm. But yeah, I mean, so I get it. But I also think that it's being lied about. I think the reasons why are being lied about, because I don't think that it's about comfort. It's still about attention, and it's still about kind of fetishizing female objectification and being like, oh, well, they get that, I want that, like. Anyway, I'm sorry, Mary Lou, it seems like you have something that you want to say here.
Well, up until very recently, there weren't very many men who displayed their paraphilias, right? I don't know how many had them, but this compulsion to display them seems new in my lifetime. I don't know if this was going on in ancient Rome or other times when things were getting weird with the culture. But I think there's more to it. I hear what you're saying, Heather, but I think there's some other psychological aspect that drives some men to paraphilias, and it's probably something that happens early in life for many of them. From what I've seen as a psychiatric nurse, I think is often related to early childhood sexual abuse and or neglect, these kind of situations going on. Mother issues. I don't think Freud was entirely wrong about men getting weird when they have mother issues, these things. But what I also know, just having worked in inpatient psych nursing, is that we know as nurses and as people working with psych patients is the most dangerous patients are the narcissistic males with fixed delusions.
That's a mouthful. Narcissistic males with fixed delusions, fixed meaning a sense of an identity that doesn't change.
Exactly. And that if you do not mirror their delusion to them, they suffer a narcissistic injury and are likely to become violent to reinforce the order that they need to maintain their identity.
What's a narcissistic injury?
When you're actually male and you're trying to get everyone to say you're female, and you get misgendered, and you throw a fit at the GameStop and yell, "It's ma'am, it's man." Like, that's the classic classic documented narcissistic injury that we have there. You just become irate that people are not viewing you as you view yourself.
Right. Like, it's sort of a control thing where you want people to address you in a particular way or treat you in a particular way or see you in a particular way, and they're not doing it, and your ego can't have that.
So one of the speakers at Genspect, and I'm afraid that I've forgotten her name, one of the detransitioners, gave an interesting talk about the difference between affirmation and validation. And I think the terms are a little confusing. But her point was, this affirmative care model is dangerous and terrible. And it says, okay, your feelings are real and feelings are reality. And therefore, whatever you feel is what is reality. And she said, no, this is obviously wrong. What we should be doing instead is a validation model, which says your feelings are real. Like, your feelings are whatever you say they are, but it stops there. Like, that doesn't mean that your feelings are real. And I guess I'm curious, Mary Lou, how that fits with does that sound like an apt psychological description of sort of, if you fail to affirm, that's when you get the narcissistic injury?
Yes.
With these people?
Yeah. If you fail to affirm, you get a narcissistic injury. And I mean, a place where this plays out that I think we're all, unfortunately, almost everyone is familiar with is like in an alcoholic home when you're dealing with denial and an addict. And it's necessary to maintain the peace of the home to not mention the addiction, right? And that's,
Right.
yeah. But that's not a therapeutic model, and it does nothing to help anybody's mental health.
Right.
So one of the responses that I saw to this controversy was actually from another trans. I don't know if these types of men identify themselves as trans women or what, but a man who's transitioned, maybe, I think often they say transsexual instead, but transitioned, living as a woman, but critical of gender identity ideology. And his name, I think he's Canadian, and his name is Julia Malott. And
was this someone who was at the conference?
Yeah, so he was there. I don't think he was dressed provocatively, but he does look male. He's not passing, whatever that means. Whenever we talk about passing, somebody is always like, but Blair White. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, Blair White looks like a female porn star. So, okay.
In person, a woman who's not profoundly instinct injured can clock Blair White as a man in person. Blair White, does a lot with filters and makeup, and on screen might pass, but Blair White has huge hands. Blair White has huge feet. Blair White, to me, like if you have not completely destroyed, if you haven't been wrecked by endocrine disruption and instinct injury over and over again, Blair's a man.
Hmm.
Yeah, or I think at least you have some sense of something's off. I think that's the sense. At the reverse, people will often say that trans men, so women who identify as men or transition to men, are more passing, which I don't think is always true, but I think it's more likely that whereas when you see a so-called trans woman, you're like, oh, that's a man in a dress. Whereas you see a trans man, you're like, that man looks strange, and I can't exactly, like, those hips are not quite manly. It just sort of seems like something's off.
Different, right? Like the stakes tend to be different. Not only are we going to see things differently, but there's less risk to us walking around to a woman who, like, granted, if she's hopped up on she's hopped up on testosterone, there's definitely risks there, as we now unfortunately all too well know. But in general, the risk is different and lower.
Absolutely. I'd love to ask you about that. I have a theory on this, Heather, that as women, we evolved to need to recognize the sex of the other members of our species. It's a much more basic survival need than for males, which is why males often can't tell. Like my husband often can't tell, but I can,
Right.
It's getting different now that people are being given puberty blockers and transition in childhood. Absolutely, that's changing. But it does not harm the safety of myself or my children for me to accidentally clock a woman as a man and be on alert. But it does affect the safety of me and my offspring to mistake a male for a female and let a strange male get too close to us.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I think you did it. That's exactly right. The piece that I think has not been recognized as broadly, I think you're also precisely right, that it doesn't matter as much for men. And men are going to say, well, of course we can tell a man from a woman. It's like, yeah, but I think anecdotally for sure, and I'll bet this would be borne out if someone did the research, that your experience of you can tell more often than your husband can would be replicated far and wide. And why? Because it's actually just much more important for us as women walking around the world. If we're going to be navigating the world on our own, or with others who similarly need to be vigilant, then it's more important that we actually know with whom we are interacting, or what kind of individual that might be coming down the dark street at us.
That's a good point, because I think that actually every single person who's said to me, what about Blair White? She's passing, has been a man. And partly it's because, I mean, if you haven't met somebody I've never met Blair White in real life, so I don't know what he looks like in real life, whether or not I would think he was a woman or not. but probably most people are seeing him on video and like on Instagram and photographs and things like that. And of course, you're using filters and makeup and angles and yada yada yada. So it's much harder to tell. But yeah, I sort of think that men. I don't know. I mean, I find that kind of sexist, to be honest. It's like, well, of course, but this person, the kinds of examples that men will bring up as of men who are passing as women, to me always look so pornified. Like they always have these cartoonish bodies and these huge fake breasts and very, very tiny waists, and they dress like porn stars, and they have tons and tons and tons of, like, they're so overdone up and perfect in order to look like women. You know, it's never just like a man who's dressed again like looking like any of us are right now. You would never say, oh well, but that man's passing as a woman.
Yeah. No, I mean exactly right. It's just a rehashing of stereotypes that we were actively moving away from.
Mm-hmm.
We really were, not the entire world, but we were. Like we were going in the right direction, and now we're not. We're supposed to not only accept that we're going backwards, but celebrate it. Like, how are we being so tricked? I mean, I know that neither of you are, and you know, but even this, even the thing that you brought me here today, Megan, to talk with you guys about. I feel like I was on as high alert as I thought I could be, and still I was sort of drawn in, right? Like, oh, okay, like I think, like, I don't feel like this guy's a threat. Doesn't matter. Like, okay, you know what? Doesn't matter. Even if I'm right about that, the fact that there are people doing this who are active threats means that any amount of this right now, any amount of it, is a risk to all of us. Like, why do half of us now have to be on high alert, on high vigilance, almost all the time, to accommodate the fetishes of a few? I don't get it.
I mean, yeah, and I think, I mean, the other thing that became obvious during the conflict, I think, was the response from this guy, and the response from some other men, to be honest. Benjamin Boyce, who is, I know, a friend of ours, I like Benjamin Boyce, but he was sort of on the other side of the conflict and controversy, and he said the dust-up over Phil Illy's appearance at the Genspect conference highlights radical feminist desire to control others' behavior, speech, and expression by claiming that such behavior is somehow harmful.
That imagines that we aren't all living with social contracts and controlling our behavior. You know, there are rules against public defecation. There are rules against public sex, right? I mean, we are controlling each other's behavior. So that seems like a facile argument, honestly.
Yeah, and I think, and I think that, you know, I think that Phil revealed a lot because he responded angrily and rudely and by mocking the women who are critical. And I was going to read this response from this Julia Malott person because I thought that his response was revealing too, and you know, frankly, quite mannish. This isn't even the entire response, so I'm going to read this, and it's a little bit long, so I apologize. But I think so. He says, Genspect proclaims to have no prejudice against trans people in any way, and I believe from experience that to be true. Again, he was at the conference. True of many of your advisors and speakers, but I also noticed that the gender dysphoric male was the butt of jokes and ridicule from more than a few speakers during your conference. Is this in alignment with your mission to cast forward a future where affirmation of the gender dysphoria is not our default pathway? If the alternative to affirmation is ridicule and marginalization, then perhaps I'm not so interested in the alternative after all. What is printed in your position statement holds little bearing when you platform speakers who would ridicule my acceptance. I was taken aback when during a conference presentation, the speaker called for a standing ovation for a particular gender-critical individual known for the vitriol she unleashes against any and all biological males who present in a gender non-conforming manner. having personally been at the receiving end of an unprovoked, dehumanizing attack from this same individual earlier this year, I was certainly disturbed that she was given a call out during the presentation and classified as a hero just because someone shares some or even all of our perspectives. I don't know who R is. It does not mean that they are someone to be admired. And then he goes, I don't know. I'm sort of guessing he might have been talking about Posey, but I'm not positive. What it was Posey?
I don't know. I don't know what he's.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. I have much more to say, which I will be including in the videos I'm releasing with my reflection on my Genspect experience. But for now, I'd like to leave you with a thought. I attended your conference and respectfully engaged with your participants. I have devoted the best part of the last 2 years to moving forward the same objective you champion, albeit at significant personal cost. When my face was shared on your Twitter feed and the dehumanizing and disgusting comments began, you did nothing. Not for a day, not for a week. Silence. That was a missed opportunity. That was a chance to display what your position statement makes clear. Transphobia exists, and it's ugly that it has no space within the Genspect community.
So the thing that jumps out at me most there is not just the use, but then the repetition of the word dehumanizing. Right. This is a weapon, and I mean that whole screed is a weapon. That's it's well written and it seems measured and careful and just like this scholarly, and aren't we using the tools of rationality to really make our points carefully? Dehumanizing? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, no one is saying these people aren't humans. Although, if we're to believe this book, you're allowed to think you're something else entirely, and that's also fine, right?
But that's not dehumanizing somehow.
That's not dehumanizing. isn't dehumanizing. But being told that actually your delusions have no place here, that's dehumanizing? Sorry, no. Like, to me, like I now have begun making a list of like, okay, what terms, when I hear them, do I know that we are just being toyed with? This is like these are people who need to get out more, like who need to go outside and use their bodies and do physical things and get feedback from the physical universe that can't lie to them. Because if the only feedback they get is from people, honestly, mostly online, who are mostly going like, you go girl. Right?
Yeah.
And then occasionally people say, no, I don't think so. You're actually a guy. Like, oh my God, I've been dehumanized. Like none of that, it's entirely social space, and none of it has any necessarily reflection in actual reality. Like the only reality thing there is like, are you male or female? And you're male, and maybe we shouldn't care about it so much. The reason we're talking about it so much is that you insist on continuing to talk about it because some of us don't buy into your delusion. And we're not going to, and that's not dehumanizing.
Yeah, I mean, I was annoyed by the statement because I found it so controlling and manipulative. It's Twitter, it's the internet, and like people have said disgusting, awful things about all of us, I'm sure. And there's not really anything you can do about it except for ignore it or block it. And I don't tend to ask other people to babysit those kinds of comments for me. Like I'm not even expecting these platforms to do anything about it. I've been here long enough to know that probably won't happen, but it also doesn't really bother me that much. Like it's just people are assholes. And I'm sure I didn't see what the comments were that he was talking about. I'm sure people were insulting his appearance or something, or calling him a pervert or something like that, maybe. But, asking the conference to come out and protect this one man from all of these women, these feminists online who are pushing back against transgenderism and probably have been for many, many years, including if he was referencing Posey. Again, this is just a guess. She's controversial, so that's why I'm guessing, and she doesn't have any tolerance for this kind of thing. Like you're mad that somebody shouted out a brave activist for women and for women's rights because you think she's mean or because she's been mean to you, and you want the conference to denounce that, and you want the conference or the organization, itself, to denounce all these comments from women and feminists who are criticizing you. It's like you're doing exactly the thing that we've all been saying you're doing.
Right.
You're being a man. You're being a narcissist.
Yep. You're doing the thing right now. Could you stop for a minute and just log the thing that you're doing and then refer back to that next time we say you're doing the thing? Right now. Totally.
Mary Lou, did you have something to say? Sorry.
I was just thinking about this word dehumanizing and how, like, what does that even mean? And again, how ironic that is coming from someone who's part of a global, like a bigger movement that literally accepts that people can identify as non-human things. This is so fascinating. But I want to back up, and that this is a person where the newspeak about this particular person is he lives as a woman. And I'm not going to use the word dehumanizing, but I do find that like profoundly insulting to women, and really it does strip us of what it means to be a woman, to accept that that's even a thing. That's one of those phrases that I would prefer never to hear again in my life, living as a woman, whenever the person who was claiming to do that is a man. Because what does that mean? Like, what? My whole life I've been trying to be viewed as a human being, not to be viewed as just a woman. The times I think, well, I feel like a woman, I think like when I was giving birth to my children, or when I'm experiencing like perimenopausal flooding, like that was a uniquely female experience that was pretty memorable as a woman's experience. But in general, we're all just trying to be human, right? And to be acknowledged as full human beings. And in that sense, this man is participating in dehumanization himself of women by the way he's chosen to live his life.
I agree.
And I mean, I think, Heather, I know you have to get going soon, so I think we'll shut down this live stream very soon. If anybody has any questions, really quick, put them in the live chat. Otherwise, I think we'll log off very shortly. And I mean, it's not like I don't think anybody, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's like anybody was demanding that this man not be present at Genspect. I mean, of course, I think anybody can go to this conference if they want to. But it's the fact that he refused or isn't capable of recognizing why women might have a problem with this, I think.
Well, I think too, I mean, so I didn't say that there was security at the conference, that we got checked on the way in each day, and there was armed security because, of course, this is a topic that draws delusional violence, delusional people and violent people. And I wanted to make one other point about something that happened at the conference. I just forgot it because I started thinking about delusional, violent people.
Story of my life. Mary Lou.
I'm sure they did have, like you're saying, a social contract of unspoken behavioral rules, and that someone would be removed from the conference if. I'm just thinking of like why are kids of my generation, why were kids removed from the classroom? Like maybe some male is there who won't stop making elbow fart noises, or these things that we've all decided are unacceptable in polite company. And we do have that social contract every time we go into a public space, especially something like a professional conference. And I don't know where the line is on that with the dress code, but I think in this space, like you pointed out in your essay, many women who are fighting this fight, we have been traumatized by these men wearing their fetish gear and getting, giving us rape threats and death threats, and for him to violate the social contract in a way was an act of aggression against all the women there.
Yeah, and I think again, maybe it's just me, but I am learning with each day that I reflect on this more, that I had the initial instinctive response of what's going on there, and had a day to sort of go like, I don't know what this is, but everyone else seems okay with it, so I guess I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And then had him come up to me, and like I said, he didn't in person, shaking his hand, looking in his eyes, he seemed okay. He really did. But all of those things allowed me to mostly override my initial sense of, wait a minute, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really is one of the giant losses that we are all taking as women, where I've been in some really dangerous situations where I've had to rely on my intuition, and I've been mugged at knife point. I'm lucky I've never had sexual trauma, but I've had dangerous, bad things happen to me. And I know that I need to rely on my intuition. And yet, and I also know the necessity of not going along with the crowd, and of not being agreeable, and of overriding that, somewhat typically female tendency to say, well, okay, it's probably okay because other people seem to think it's okay. And, I'm good at overriding these things. And in this case, I didn't entirely do it. So I feel like, if I tricked myself, like almost everyone's going to be tricking themselves to some degree here. And we don't know what all the effects are going to be. Like it feels really dangerous and bad right now, and like increasingly stupid out there in the world. But I feel like maybe we haven't even begun to see what all of the downstream effects of accepting so much of this are going to be.
I think that's a good place to end, unless you have something else you want to add, Mary Lou.
I think that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, Heather. I'm so happy that we could include you in this conversation. I really appreciate your contributions. And everyone, if everyone wants to read what Heather wrote on her Substack, again, it's at naturalselections.bio. And thank you to Mary Lou for joining, as always. And thank you so much for everyone who joined the stream in the live chat. I really appreciate that as well.
Great to meet you, Mary Lou. Great to see you again, Megan.
Okay, thanks a lot, and have a good night, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.